The world has edges, not always geographical, but operational. These are the thin lines where systems built for predictability meet the wild forces of nature and human error. On a frigid afternoon in late 2024, Alaska Airlines Flight 558 found itself on such an edge. It was a routine flight from a remote Alaskan airport, a lifeline in a land of ice and isolation. The sudden closure of that airport was more than an inconvenience. It was a test of pilots, procedures, and the very assumptions behind aviation safety. In Alaska, aviation isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Roads are scarce, the terrain unforgiving. Airports like Utqiagvik are arteries carrying mail, medicine, food, and people. The closure of such an artery is catastrophic, severing a critical supply line. The pilots of Flight 558 weren't just flying a plane. They were navigating the intersection of modern technology and a demanding landscape. This isn't a story of fire and wreckage, but of cascading failures and communications breaking down. The ordeal began not with a storm or engine failure, but with a bureaucratic decision, a failure on the ground that rippled into the cockpit. It's a reminder, air safety isn't static, it's a constant negotiation with risk. The closure of Utqiagvik's airport forced a re-examination of how we manage remote airfields and communicate critical safety information. A seemingly local problem became a systemic threat, challenging the robust layers of safety that crews and passengers rely on. The sky is safe because we make it so, through vigilance and learning from our mistakes. In Alaska, every flight is a negotiation with the edge of the world. The story of Flight 558 is a case study in how quickly the margins for error can vanish, and how, even in the quietest moments, the stakes can be life and death. November 12, 2024. Alaska Airlines Flight 558, a Boeing 737-700, prepares for its regular service from Utqiagvik to Anchorage. The crew is experienced, the weather cold but clear, typical for the region. At 2:15 p.m., 104 passengers and 5 crew members lift off from runway 7, heading south over the stark expanse of the North Slope. The climb is smooth, the cabin calm. For passengers, locals, oil workers, government employees, it's a familiar journey. The 725-mile flight compresses days of land travel into under 2 hours. The first hour is uneventful. Pilots monitor instruments, autopilot manages the course, and air traffic control tracks their progress. The aircraft is operating perfectly, with fuel calculated for Anchorage and a standard diversion to Fairbanks if needed. Every flight plan has contingencies. The system is built on redundancy. The pilots have no reason to expect anything but a routine flight. But aviation safety is a chain of dependencies. The aircraft relies on the crew on air traffic control, and all depend on the integrity of ground infrastructure. The assumption, an airport, once departed, remains a viable emergency option. What the crew doesn't know is that their safety net, the runway they just left, is about to disappear. A problem is developing on the ground, one that will soon turn routine into ordeal. In Alaska, the unexpected is always just below the surface. The next message they receive will change everything. The edge of the world is closer than it seems. The problem was ice, not on the wings, but on the runway. A sudden drop in temperature and light precipitation created black ice at Utqiagvik's only runway. Maintenance crews struggled. Braking tests showed dangerously low friction. At 3:05 p.m., an hour after Flight 558's departure, the airport manager closed the runway via NOTAM. The airport was shut down, setting off a chain reaction. The crew, now halfway to Anchorage, received a stark message. BRW closed. Their departure airport was no longer an option. While Anchorage was still open and fuel was sufficient, losing Utqiagvik as a backup narrowed their safety margin. In remote Alaska, every runway is a potential lifeline. The closure wasn't temporary, it was indefinite, with limited de-icing resources and persistent cold. The entire North Slope became a no-go zone. The pilots calmly assessed their situation, but the psychological pressure was real. What if Anchorage closed? What if a mechanical issue arose? Their alternate Fairbanks was still viable, but the loss of options was felt in the cockpit. The problem on the ground now traveled with them through the sky. In Alaska, the margin for error had just gotten thinner. Utqiagvik's airport isn't a major hub, but its importance is immense. With a single 100-foot runway, it's the only airlink for nearly 5,000 people and handles over 60,000 passengers a year. It's the town's highway, port, and emergency exit. Cargo flights bring everything from food to medical supplies, A closure disrupts the fragile supply chain. The airport supports the oil industry and scientific research. Its status is a barometer for the region's health. The nearest alternate for a jet is 200 miles away. Fairbanks is over 500. Fuel planning is critical, and a closure like this sends shockwaves through Alaska's air network. Every flight, every delivery is affected. The failure of one node, especially BRW, forces real-time recalculations for airlines and controllers. The closure wasn't just a local problem, it became a strategic challenge for the entire state. In Alaska, the airport is the community's lifeline. In the cockpit, the pilots practiced threat and error management. The closure was the threat. Their response would determine the outcome. They confirmed the closure with dispatch, discussed fuel and options, and briefed the cabin crew. The plan: continue to Anchorage but be ready to divert to Fairbanks. On the ground, the airport manager's decision was based on hard data and safety, not convenience. Keeping the runway open would have risked a runway excursion. The airline's dispatch center became the information hub, monitoring weather and recalculating fuel scenarios. As Flight 558 neared Anchorage, a disabled aircraft caused minor delays, another variable to manage. The pilots factored it into their approach, prepared for a possible hold. What began as routine had become a dynamic exercise in problem solving. Every link in the chain, pilots, dispatchers, ground staff, was tested. Calm professionalism kept the flight safe. In Alaska, adaptability is as important as skill. The margin for error had never felt so thin. Flight 558 landed safely, but the impact of the closure was just beginning. For 36 hours, Utqiagvik was cut off, no flights in or out. Dozens were stranded, medical appointments missed, and store shelves began to empty. Alaska Airlines and others absorbed the cost of cancellations and logistics chaos. The community felt the disruption acutely: no fresh food, delayed mail, and a stark reminder of their isolation. The event exposed weaknesses in snow and ice control, sparking debate about funding and preparedness. Upgrading equipment is costly for a remote town, but the need is clear. The closure became a topic everywhere, from homes to the town council. It forced a reckoning with the fragility of their lifeline. In the Arctic, resilience is tested every day. Flight 558's ordeal echoes other aviation crises where options vanished. The Gimli glider, a Boeing 767, lost all power and landed on a decommissioned airstrip. Taka Flight 110, a 737, lost both engines in a storm, landing safely on a grass levee. In each case, the safety net disappeared, fuel, engines, or runways gone. The challenge became managing a shrinking list of safe outcomes. The psychological pressure on crews is immense. Training and discipline are tested to the limit. The key difference with Flight 558: the failure was infrastructural, not mechanical. The closure was a ground-based problem, not an aircraft malfunction. Modern planes are reliable but useless without safe runways. The lesson: the safety chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and that link may be hundreds of miles away. Flight 558 is a warning. Even the best systems can be undone by a single point of failure. In aviation, every option matters, and sometimes the ground is the greatest risk. After the incident, the FAA and NTSB launched a review, not of the crew but of the system. The focus: airport preparedness for Arctic weather, snow and ice control, and decision-making for runway closures. Recommendations followed: more de-icing chemicals, better runway monitoring, and enhanced contingency planning for single runway airports. Airlines reviewed dispatch and crew training, using the event as a case study in resource management. The incident reinforced the need for clear communication and proactive threat management. The path forward is multifaceted: infrastructure investment, regulatory refinement, and ongoing vigilance. Safety isn't just about preventing accidents, it's about building resilience. The system must handle overlapping challenges, not just single failures. Flight 558 landed safely, but the cracks in the system were revealed. The lesson: every link in the chain must be fortified. In Alaska, the margin for error is razor thin. The future depends on learning from every close call. The story of Flight 558 is a quiet drama, a test of resilience, not heroics. The system worked, but only just. The incident highlights the critical role of remote airports and the systemic effects of their failure. The greatest threats may not be mechanical, but logistical and infrastructural. Safety depends as much on the snowplow driver as the pilot. The ordeal was a warning. The margins are thin, the dependencies absolute. Are we investing enough in the foundations that keep aviation safe? As we push further into the remote corners of the world, that question remains unanswered.